It was, I think, about a week ago where we were hosting a party down at the Newman Center at Holland House, and as the evening was wearing on, the wonderful, fun party, very enjoyable, I went into the house to say goodbye to some folks because I was getting tired and it was time for me to go home. And as I was entering the kitchen, I heard this squeal from the back room, and I went around the corner to see what was going on. And I saw this really strange sight. 4 students, I won't say who, were standing around looking at a water glass in the very center of the room, and it was turned upside down. And under the water glass was a very large spider. And nobody seemed to want to touch it. And just think about this for a second. Upon seeing a spider, these students' first reaction was to go to the kitchen cupboard and grab a water glass and trap the spider. And so I looked at the glass, I looked at the spider, I looked at them, I said, "What's going on?" And they said to me, "Father Peter, do something, get rid of it." Well, okay, fine. So I went to the same kitchen, not the cupboard. I got some paper towels, and I went, knelt down, lifted up the glass, and grabbed the spider. And then squished it. And the students were kind of shocked. They were a little bit disturbed that without any hesitation, I just killed the spider. And as I was turning around to go to flush the remains of this spider, I heard a student say, "Well, next time Father Peter preaches a homily on confession, I'm going to remind him of this." Well, okay. Here's that homily. If you listen to what's going on in the gospel, and quite honestly, I think there are very few moments where Jesus speaks or encounters a sinner or cures someone who is ill. There's almost no moments when Jesus is at work where there isn't a message of compassion. So these homilies come around rather often. But today, there's a unique audience. Today, Jesus isn't preaching to the crowds like he would during the Sermon on the Mount. Today, he's not speaking to the religious leaders or the scribes and the Pharisees. No, today, he's specifically speaking to his disciples. The first line of the parable, the gospel, Jesus told his disciples this parable. This is a moment just between him and them. This is a moment where he's giving them instructions on how to be better disciples. This isn't a parable meant for the crowds. This is a parable meant for his inner group. And he's trying to help them to understand really 2 things. As we listen to this parable, there are 2 groups of people that we can identify with. Both laborers. In the Gospels, Jesus often uses this image of a vineyard to represent the kingdom of God. A vineyard for Jesus was a place of security, a place of abundance, a close community, a family even, where people were often invited to have a role of work and responsibility, a role of welcome and inclusion. It was, for Jesus, a beautiful image for the kingdom that he was trying to create. And so for this landowner who represents God the Father to be going out into the marketplace, the world, and inviting people to come in and labor with him, to join his family in the daily work, to become part of his community, to do something good, to build up the vineyard and to build up the kingdom. We see those who have been invited to spend the entire day, to endure the heat and all of the heavy labor of the work, which obviously are the disciples that are hearing this parable for the first time. And very often, often, as we identify ourselves in this story, I think maybe we too would be amongst those crowds who maybe early on in our life, maybe at the start of the day, maybe at 9 or at noon, we find ourselves coming into the vineyard. We find ourselves being called by God to be disciples in his kingdom. And so because of that, we have work to do. But the work is a very particular type of work. The work is something that might make us uncomfortable. The work is something that for a lot of people in our world, and at times a lot of people in our faith, makes no sense. And that's why we hear this reading from Isaiah. My thoughts are not your thoughts, says God, nor are my ways your ways. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so high are my ways above your ways. And so the ways of the landowner in this parable is the way of generosity, is the way of incredible kindness. Because notice, the landowner goes out at 5 o'clock looking for more laborers, knowing that even if he finds someone, he's not going to get a lot of work out of them because the sun's already going down. But he goes out anyway. He goes out looking to welcome, to call in more. To work in the vineyard is not just simply a job, but it's to become part of the community of that establishment, of that family endeavor. And so he goes out constantly, hour after hour, to welcome more, knowing well that at 5 o'clock at night, he's not going to get very talented laborers. In fact, here's the exchange. The landowner looks at those who have been standing around all day and saying, "Why are you here idle? Why have you not put in any labor?" And they say, "Because no one has hired us." For someone to have stood in the marketplace all day looking for work, looking to be hired, knowing that they haven't been hired, the landowner realizes something that we need to learn. Those people were the outcasts of society. The people who stood around looking for work but have not been hired are those who found no one to welcome them, no one to invite them in, no one to give them an opportunity. Maybe they didn't speak the language. Maybe they weren't from that community or from that land. Maybe they had every reason to be excluded and marginalized. No one wanted them. And the landowner says, "You too, you go into my vineyard. I know I won't get much work from you today, but you are welcome. You are wanted. I desire you to be part of my community, my family, my kingdom. I want you in my vineyard. Share in my abundance. And when the time comes to pay for the labor of the day," the landowner says, "Start with them first. Start with the ones who no one else wanted. Start with the ones who may have been disabled or elderly. Start with the ones who didn't fit in, who were strangers in this land. Start with them and shower them with unique abundance and generosity. Give them far more than they deserve. Let them know how much I value them and how much I consider their worth. Pay them the same as everyone else." This is what God means when he says, "My ways are not your ways." This is what the disciples needed to learn, that as they endeavored to build up the kingdom of God from the very beginning with Jesus, so they needed to learn, and I dare say we need to constantly be reminded that the kingdom of God is built not just for those who have been working all day, but especially those who never thought they would ever be welcomed. Our responsibility as laborers in the kingdom is to go outside these walls, and you've heard me say this before, to go outside these walls and to welcome and invite in those same people who sit wondering and waiting for someone to welcome them, wondering and waiting if ever they would be included, if ever they would be invited. It doesn't matter who they are, where they're from, what they are. It does not matter what they've done, what they wrestle with, what their past is, what their present is, nor what their future may be. They must find in our midst a consistent and open welcome. They must, by our labor, be brought in and receive from our God the same abundance of grace that we so often celebrate. This is our labor. This is our responsibility. This is that compassionate message that our God promises us, that if we seek Him, if we seek the Lord while He may be found, if we call out to Him when He is near, He will bless us with mercy. He will grant us His grace because He is generous in forgiving. He is generous in payment. He is generous in open arms and open welcome. And St. Paul says to us that for us to engage in this labor in the kingdom, this is our responsibility, because he says, conduct yourselves, work and labor in a way, conduct yourselves in a way worthy of the gospel of Christ. This is the gospel of Christ. This welcome, this invitation, and this challenge to labor for something good and just. This, above many other things, is the gospel of Christ.